At 10:42 p.m., my phone buzzed while I was sitting alone in my garage, fixing an old Panasonic radio I'd owned since the late 80s. 3 words lit up the screen. Dad. Red folder. Then a live location pin appeared underneath it. My daughter's house. I remember staring at the message for maybe 2 seconds too long. Not because I didn't understand it, because I understood it immediately. Rachel hadn't used those words since she was 12 years old. Outside rain tapped softly against the garage door. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went quiet again. The old radio on my workbench hummed static while my coffee went cold beside a pile of sockets and screwdrivers. I suddenly couldn't feel my hands. I'm 67 years old, retired Navy Admiral, widower, grandfather. Most days, the biggest decision I make is whether I'm taking the boat out or staying home to fight with my lawnmower. But the second I saw those words, every calm part of me disappeared. Years ago, after Rachel's mother died unexpectedly from an aneurysm, my daughter became terrified of being alone. She was 12. Skinny little thing with braces and oversized hoodies, pretending she was tougher than she felt. One night after the funeral, she asked me something I never forgot. Dad, what if someday I'm scared and I don't know how to say it? So we made a code. Red folder. It meant don't ask questions. Don't waste time. Just come. And now, 23 years later, she was using it again. I called her immediately. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. By the 3rd call, I was already grabbing my truck keys. The rain had picked up outside. Chesapeake was about 25 minutes from my place near Norfolk if traffic behaved itself. At that hour, most roads would be empty, except for truckers and drunks. As I backed out of the driveway, I called Frank Delaney. Frank retired from NCIS 8 years ago. Though honestly, men like Frank never fully retire from anything. He answered on the 2nd ring, sounding half asleep. Tom. She used the code. Silence. That woke him up faster than coffee. How bad? I don't know yet. Another pause. Then his voice changed completely. You heading there now? Yeah. I'll meet you outside the subdivision. I hung up and drove. Rain streaked across the windshield, while old country music played quietly through one busted speaker. I barely heard any of it. All I could think about were little things I should have paid attention to sooner. Rachel wearing long sleeves in July. The way she apologized constantly. How Lucy went quiet whenever Ethan raised his voice too suddenly. At Thanksgiving last year, Ethan snapped at Rachel because the turkey was dry. Not yelled exactly. Worse. That cold, embarrassed tone people use when they want an audience to know they think you're stupid. Rachel laughed it off too quickly. I remember seeing her hands shake while she poured gravy. And I did nothing. That's the part that still sits in my chest. People think men like me always act. Always protect. Truth is, sometimes you convince yourself keeping peace is the same thing as keeping people safe. It isn't. I reached the Chesapeake subdivision around 11:05. Frank was already parked near the entrance in his gray Tacoma windshield wipers, moving steadily. He climbed into my passenger seat wearing jeans, boots, and an old Navy sweatshirt. You armed? He asked quietly. Number. He nodded once, like he respected the answer. We drove the rest of the way without much talking. Rachel and Ethan lived in one of those newer developments, with identical beige houses and tiny decorative trees out front. Ethan loved places that looked expensive from a distance. Rachel's porch light was on. I parked across the street and killed the engine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then we heard shouting, even through the rain. Frank looked at me carefully. You want police now? I kept staring at the house. Kitchen light glowing, garage half open, Lucy's pink bicycle tipped over near the driveway. Then Ethan's voice exploded through the front window. You think your father's gonna save you? My stomach dropped. I got out of the truck before Frank could say another word. Rain soaked through my jacket immediately as we crossed the street fast, but controlled. Not running. Men our age don't run unless something's dying. Halfway up the walkway, I heard something crash inside the house. Glass, maybe. Then Lucy crying. Not loud. Worse than loud. Scared crying. The kind children make when they're trying not to be heard. Frank reached for my arm lightly. Tom. But I was already at the front door. And for the first time in years, I could actually feel my heart pounding hard enough to hurt. I opened the door without knocking. The smell hit me first. Whiskey. Broken glass. Something burned in the kitchen. Rachel stood near the dining room table, clutching one arm against her ribs. Her lip was split badly enough I could see fresh blood along her chin. Lucy was halfway hidden behind her legs, wearing little pink pajama pants with dolphins on them. And Ethan Parker stood near the kitchen island, holding a half-empty tumbler, like this was some ordinary argument that had simply gotten a little heated. The second he saw me, his whole expression changed. "Tom," he said quickly, "this isn't what it looks like." Funny thing about liars, they almost always use the exact same sentence. Lucy saw me and ran immediately. "Grandpa." I bent down automatically and caught her against my chest. She was shaking hard, tiny hands gripping my shirt so tightly it hurt. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said softly. "Go sit in the kitchen with Mr. Frank for me." Frank had already stepped inside behind me, calm as stone. He crouched beside Lucy gently. "Hey there, kiddo. Think you can help me find cookies?" Lucy nodded against tears. Rachel wouldn't look directly at me. That hurt worse than the blood. Ethan tried giving this nervous little laugh. Couples fight, right? Everybody's emotional. Rachel quietly said Ethan stopped talking. But he kept going anyway. She threw a glass at me first. I looked around. Broken pieces glittered near the living room rug. One lamp had been knocked sideways. A dining chair lay on its side near the hallway. Rachel shifted slightly, and I noticed her flinch when Ethan moved closer. Small movement. Tiny. But once you notice something like that, you can't unsee it. I spent 38 years around military personnel, young sailors, combat officers, men coming home from deployments pretending they were fine when they weren't. Fear has body language. And my daughter had it. Ethan noticed me watching him. His jaw tightened. "Look, Tom, I know how this probably looks." "Lucy hear all this?" I asked. He blinked. "What? Did my granddaughter hear you hit her mother?" The room went completely still. Rachel whispered Dad. Ethan set the glass down too hard on the counter. "I never hit her." Rachel looked down immediately. That told me enough. There's a moment in life when denial finally runs out of room. Standing there in that dining room listening to rain hit the windows, while my granddaughter cried quietly in the kitchen, I realized I'd crossed that line. And the worst part. Some part of me had known for a long time. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. When Rachel married Ethan 8 years earlier, I genuinely liked him. Hell, I loved him. He came from a working-class family outside Richmond. Smart kid, ambitious, played decent golf, talked too much, but plenty of young men do. The first winter after they bought their starter house, Ethan spent 2 weekends helping me repair storm damage on Rachel's roof. Never complained once. When Lucy was born premature, he slept in hospital chairs for days. I remember watching him hold that tiny little baby against his chest at Norfolk General and thinking, my daughter picked a good man. That's the thing people don't understand about situations like this. Bad marriages usually don't start bad. They rot slowly. After Ethan got promoted at his medical equipment company, something shifted. At first it seemed harmless. More expensive suits, country club lunches, a leased BMW he absolutely couldn't afford. Then came the little comments. Rachel worries too much. You know how emotional women are. Old school discipline doesn't work anymore, Admiral. Always smiling when he said it, like everything was a joke. Rachel started canceling visits. Stopped calling as much. She seemed exhausted all the time. One Thanksgiving, Ethan spent half the afternoon flirting with a real estate agent, young enough to be his intern, while Rachel cleaned dishes alone in the kitchen. I almost threw him out of my house that day. Rachel begged me not to. Please, Dad, don't make this worse. Those words came back now, while I stood in her dining room staring at the bruise forming under her eye. Ethan folded his arms. "She texted you over an argument." Rachel suddenly snapped. It wasn't an argument. The force in her voice surprised all of us, even her. Ethan immediately pointed at her. "See, this is what I deal with. She gets dramatic and then runs crying to her father." I took one step forward. Not fast, not threatening. Just enough. Ethan stopped talking. "I'm taking Rachel and Lucy with me tonight," I said calmly. "Number." That came from Ethan instantly. Rachel looked terrified again. "They're leaving," I repeated. "You can't just walk in here and take my family." My family. Funny how men like him use that phrase only when control starts slipping away. Rachel quietly moved toward the hallway where Lucy sat with Frank. Ethan saw it and grabbed Rachel's arm hard enough that she gasped. Something cold moved through me then. Not rage exactly. Worse. Clarity. I walked right up to him until we stood maybe 2 feet apart. Ethan was taller than me by an inch or two, younger by nearly 30 years, drunk enough to feel brave. But his eyes changed when he looked at mine. I said very quietly, "Take your hands off my daughter." For a second, nobody moved. Then Ethan released her arm with this ugly little smirk. "What are you gonna do, old man?" he said. "Call the Navy." Frank shifted slightly behind me. "Ready." Rachel suddenly grabbed my wrist. Her hand was ice cold. "Dad." I turned toward her. And I swear that moment aged me 10 years. Because my little girl, 35 years old, mother of a child, smart, kind, capable, looked exactly like she had the night we buried her mother. Small, scared, trying not to fall apart. "Please don't leave tonight," she whispered. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the Chesapeake Bay. And for the first time I realized this wasn't one bad night. This had been happening for a very long time. The police arrived about 12 minutes later. Not sirens, just 2 Chesapeake patrol cars pulling quietly onto the curb, while rain dripped from the oak trees lining the street. By then, Ethan had sobered up just enough to become careful. That's what scared me most about him. Not the yelling, not the drinking. The switch. One minute he was screaming at my daughter. The next, he stood calmly explaining misunderstandings to responding officers, like some exhausted suburban husband dealing with an overreaction. Rachel sat at the kitchen table holding a bag of frozen peas against her cheek, while Officer Daniels asked gentle questions. "Did your husband strike you tonight?" Long pause. Rachel looked at Ethan. Huge mistake. Women in fear always check the room before answering honestly. We both got upset," she whispered. I closed my eyes for a second. Officer Daniels stayed patient. "Ma'am, I need a clear answer." Rachel swallowed hard. "Number." Frank leaned against the counter beside me quietly. He didn't react outwardly, but I knew exactly what he was thinking. Without cooperation, there wouldn't be an arrest tonight. Ethan sat in the living room looking wounded and offended. At one point, he actually sighed and said, "I think her father just escalated things." I nearly put him through the wall. Instead, I stood there, listening to rainwater drip from my jacket onto Rachel's kitchen floor, while years of regret slowly settled into my bones. By midnight, the officers strongly encouraged separation for the evening. Rachel packed 2 overnight bags with trembling hands, while Lucy carried her stuffed dolphin backpack sleepily down the hallway. Ethan followed Rachel around the house, trying to sound calm. "You're seriously leaving with him?" Rachel said nothing. "You're scaring Lucy more doing this." Still nothing. Then he looked at me. Satisfied little smile. Because he knew exactly what he was doing. Men like Ethan don't need to win arguments. They just need everyone exhausted enough to stop fighting back. As Rachel zipped Lucy's jacket near the front door, Ethan suddenly softened his voice. "Rach, come on." For half a second, I saw confusion cross her face. That tiny pull backward victims get when the person hurting them suddenly sounds familiar again. Then Lucy grabbed Rachel's hand tightly and whispered, "Mommy, please." That broke the spell. We left. The drive back to Norfolk was quiet, except for windshield wipers and Lucy sniffling softly in the back seat. Frank followed behind us in his Tacoma until we reached my neighborhood near the marina. Rachel used to love that neighborhood when she was little. Small brick homes, boats rocking gently in slips nearby, the smell of salt air drifting inland at night, back when life still made sense. Lucy fell asleep on the couch almost immediately after arriving at my house. Frank found extra blankets, while Rachel stood silently in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker like she'd forgotten how it worked. I poured her coffee anyway. She wrapped both hands around the mug but never drank it. Around 2 in the morning, Frank quietly headed home. Before leaving, he stopped beside me near the front porch. "This isn't new," he said. "Number. You gonna tell me how bad you think it is?" I looked through the doorway toward Rachel sitting motionless at the kitchen table. "Worse than I let myself believe." Frank nodded once. "Call me tomorrow." Then he disappeared into the rain. I didn't sleep that night. At 4 in the morning, I sat alone in the dark kitchen, listening to the ice maker dump fresh cubes into the freezer tray. Strange what sounds stick with you during bad nights. Rachel eventually walked in, wearing one of her old high school sweatshirts she still kept at my house. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly asked, "Do you hate me?" That damn near shattered me. "Hate you." "For staying?" I stared at my daughter for a long time before answering. "No," I said finally. "I hate that you thought you had to." Rachel started crying immediately after that. Not dramatic crying, just exhausted crying. The kind people do when they've spent too long holding themselves together. Over the next hour, pieces finally started coming out. Ethan controlled nearly every account they had, checked her phone regularly, picked fights before family events so she'd seem unstable afterward, criticized her clothes, her weight, her parenting, sometimes for days straight. And when he drank, everything got worse. "How long?" I asked quietly. Rachel wiped her eyes. "A while." "How long?" She looked down into her untouched coffee. "He hit me the first time after Lucy turned 2. Something inside my chest physically hurt hearing that sentence. I stood up too fast, walked straight into the garage, and slammed my fist into a storage cabinet hard enough to dent the metal. Pain shot through my hand instantly. Good. I deserved it. A few seconds later, Rachel appeared in the doorway behind me. "You never hit Mom," she said softly. I laughed once without humor. "No," I said. But apparently I missed a hell of a lot. Later that afternoon, Frank came by with sandwiches and a legal pad full of notes. Not dramatic detective work, just patient old man investigating. "Started looking at public records," he said. Rachel stiffened immediately. Frank noticed. "Relax, nothing illegal." He sat at my dining table and spread out printed bank summaries Rachel had access to through shared tax documents. Repeated hotel charges, luxury purchases, restaurant bills Rachel knew nothing about. Then Frank slid over a social media photo. A brunette woman around 40, laughing beside Ethan at some rooftop bar in Virginia Beach. "Vanessa Mercer," Frank said. "Married. Husband's a local TV attorney." Rachel stared at the picture like someone punched the air out of her lungs. "I thought I was imagining it," she whispered. "That's not all," Frank added carefully. He handed me another document. Preliminary divorce paperwork. Private consultation records. Asset division estimates. My stomach turned. Ethan had been planning an exit while draining money from the family. Rachel covered her mouth. Then came the sentence that finally made everything worse. "Dad," she whispered. She looked at me with pure shame in her eyes. "He used Lucy's college fund." For a second, I honestly thought I misunderstood her. Maybe because some part of my brain still wanted limits, even after everything else. "What do you mean he used it?" I asked. Rachel looked physically sick saying it out loud. "He borrowed against it." "How much?" She didn't answer immediately. That silence told me before the number did. "Rachel." Her eyes filled again. Almost all of it. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table because my knees suddenly didn't feel steady anymore. Lucy's college account wasn't just money. It was 20 years of overtime deployments, government bonuses, and disciplined saving after Diane died. I started that account the week Rachel graduated high school. Every birthday, every Christmas, every promotion after retirement, I added something to it. Not because I'm rich, military pensions sound bigger than they are, but because I wanted one thing in this family, untouched by hardship. Frank rubbed one hand across his jaw. How exactly did he access it? Rachel swallowed hard. He kept saying we needed temporary liquidity. I blinked. Liquidity. He talked like that all the time near the end, like everything was a business meeting. Turns out Ethan had gradually manipulated Rachel into signing digital paperwork connected to refinancing and investment transfers. Sometimes late at night after arguments, sometimes mixed into legitimate tax documents. Classic overload tactic. Confuse people until they stop asking questions. Frank quietly slid another page toward me. He also transferred money through a private investment account tied to his work bonuses. I stared at the numbers. Hotel charges, luxury apartment payments, designer stores, golf trips. While Rachel clipped coupons and reused Lucy's school supplies. Something hot crawled up my throat then. Not anger exactly. Shame. Because I helped this man. I helped him get interviews through old Navy contacts after business school, helped with their first down payment, loaned him money twice when Rachel never found out. I kept telling myself I was supporting family. Meanwhile, my daughter was drowning 5 miles away. Rachel suddenly whispered, "You warned me once." I looked up. What? At Thanksgiving, you asked if he embarrassed me on purpose. I remembered that conversation immediately. She'd been loading the dishwasher while Ethan laughed too loudly in the living room with some younger woman from his office. I told Rachel, "A man who enjoys humiliating you in public usually does worse in private." She defended him for 20 straight minutes afterward. Now she sat at my kitchen table looking hollowed out by years of excuses. "I should have listened," she said quietly. "No," I answered. "I should have pushed harder." That afternoon, Frank arranged a meeting with an attorney named Linda Morales. Linda was 58, sharp eyes, gray streak through black hair, calm in the dangerous way experienced people get. The moment she walked into my house, she looked familiar. Then she smiled slightly. "You probably don't remember me," she said. "Morales. My father served under you aboard the Roosevelt in '91. I stared another second before it clicked. "Jesus, Hector Morales." She laughed softly. "He still talks about you like you hung the moon." "Well, your father saved my ass during a navigation failure once, so we're even." That tiny moment of warmth disappeared once she opened Rachel's paperwork. For nearly 2 hours, Linda reviewed bank statements, text messages, account transfers, and copies of Ethan's preliminary divorce filings. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "Rachel," she said gently, "your husband likely committed financial abuse, fraud, and potentially embezzlement." Rachel looked terrified hearing the words spoken aloud. "He said none of it mattered because we were married." Linda shook her head. "That's not how this works. What if he takes Lucy?" There it was. The real fear underneath everything. Not Ethan, not the bruises. Losing her daughter. Linda's tone softened slightly. Family courts don't look kindly on documented abuse or financial deception, especially involving a child's education fund. Rachel nodded, but I could tell she still felt trapped. That's the ugly thing abuse does. Even after the door opens, people forget they're allowed to walk through it. Over the next week, little things slowly changed. Rachel opened her own checking account, changed passwords, started answering calls from old friends she'd gradually disappeared from over the years. One afternoon, I overheard her laughing with a former co-worker in the backyard while Lucy chased Bubbles through the grass. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from my daughter in a very long time. Ethan, meanwhile, became unpredictable. Some days he sent apologetic messages. "I miss my family." Other days, "Your father is poisoning you against me." Then came the guilt. "Lucy deserves both parents." Then anger. "You think anybody else will want you now?" I read that text while sitting in my truck outside Harris Teeter one evening and nearly drove straight to Ethan's apartment. Instead, I parked beside a gas pump at a 24-hour Shell station and sat there listening to sports radio until I calmed down. At my age, you learn something important. A bad decision made in anger can erase 50 years of discipline. When I got home that night, Linda and Frank were already sitting at my dining table reviewing new documents. Linda looked up immediately. "We found something bigger." She slid a folder toward me. Expense reports, corporate reimbursements, travel claims. Ethan had apparently been charging personal trips and luxury expenses through company accounts for over a year. Not millions, not movie-level fraud. Realistic greed. The kind people convince themselves they'll eventually fix later. Frank pointed at several highlighted entries. Hidden apartment lease, jewelry purchases, resort weekends. Rachel looked pale. He told me we were struggling financially. Linda closed the folder carefully. People like Ethan build entire lives around appearance. Once that image cracks, everything underneath usually collapses fast. Rachel sat very still, then finally asked the question none of us had wanted to say aloud. "What happens now?" Linda looked directly at her. "That depends on whether you're ready to stop protecting him." The room went quiet. Outside, I could hear Lucy riding her bike slowly up and down the driveway, while the evening sprinkler clicked rhythmically across the lawn next door. Rachel stared at the paperwork for a very long time. Then she took a breath and nodded once. 3 weeks later, Ethan walked into the Norfolk Harbor Foundation banquet, believing his life was about to get better. That was the tragic part. He still thought he was the smartest man in every room. The banquet happened every spring at the Waterside Marriott, overlooking the Elizabeth River. Wealthy donors, local executives, military retirees, politicians pretending to enjoy rubber chicken dinners, same crowd every year. I'd attended twice before with Diane years ago. Back then it felt like community networking. Now it felt like theater. Rachel almost didn't go. "I don't want a scene," she told Linda that afternoon, while standing in my kitchen twisting her wedding ring around her finger. Linda answered calmly, "You're not creating the scene. He already did that himself." Rachel finally removed the ring completely and left it beside the sink. Small moment. Big meaning. By 7 that evening, the ballroom was packed with soft jazz clinking glasses and people wearing expensive smiles. I kept things simple: navy blazer, gray slacks, old Rolex, no military pins. Half the room probably assumed I was somebody's retired uncle tagging along for free salmon. Perfect. Frank stood near the back bar nursing club soda, while Linda quietly moved through conversations, like a woman playing chess 6 moves ahead. And Ethan arrived like a man auditioning for success. Tailored charcoal suit, perfect haircut, bright white smile. Vanessa Mercer walked beside him, wearing a silver dress that probably cost more than my first car. A few people noticed immediately. Most pretended not to. That's upper-middle-class America for you. Everybody sees everything. Nobody says it out loud unless there's blood in the water. I watched Ethan shake hands across the ballroom like a politician working a county fair. Confident, relaxed, untouchable. At one point, he even laughed loudly enough for me to hear. Big promotion coming soon. Finally getting rewarded around here. Frank muttered beside me. That man could drown in 3 inches of water and still think he invented swimming. I almost smiled. Around 8 o'clock, Ethan finally spotted me near the bar. His expression changed instantly. Not fear. Annoyance. Like I'd shown up wearing muddy boots to his country club fantasy. Well, he said approaching with a bourbon glass in hand didn't expect military grandpa night. I kept sipping my iced tea. "How's Chesapeake traffic these days?" I asked. That irritated him immediately, because I wasn't playing the game he wanted. Vanessa looked awkward standing beside him. She clearly knew enough to feel uncomfortable, but not enough to leave. Ethan leaned slightly closer. "You know, Tom, Rachel's really struggling mentally right now." There it was. The setup. He wanted witnesses hearing his version early. I looked him directly in the eye. My daughter's doing better than she has in years. His jaw tightened for half a second. Then the fake smile returned. Well, guess we all tell ourselves comforting stories. He walked away after that, but I noticed him checking over his shoulder twice. Tiny crack. Meanwhile, things had already started moving underneath the surface. Earlier that week, Linda quietly provided documentation to Ethan's employer regarding suspicious expense reimbursements. Not accusations, just records. Enough to trigger internal investigators. Separately, Vanessa's husband attorney Daniel Mercer received anonymous evidence connecting Ethan to the affair. Nobody coordinated drama. That's important. Real life isn't usually explosive all at once. Pressure builds quietly first. By 8:30, you could already feel tension shifting through the ballroom in subtle ways. People whispering, phones checking messages, certain executives suddenly avoiding Ethan. Vanessa noticed it too. She kept scanning the room nervously while Ethan drank more heavily, trying to maintain control of conversations. Then Daniel Mercer arrived. Tall guy, mid-40s, controlled anger written all over him. He walked directly toward Vanessa. No shouting. No dramatic accusations. Just we need to talk now. Vanessa went pale immediately. Ethan stepped in fast. Daniel, this isn't the place. Daniel looked at him with absolute disgust. You've spent 6 months sleeping with my wife in hotel rooms paid for by your company. I think any place works fine. Several nearby conversations stopped instantly. That's the thing about public scandals. People pretend not to stare while staring harder than ever. Vanessa grabbed Daniel's arm, trying to pull him away quietly, but the damage was already done. Across the ballroom, I noticed 2 men in dark suits entering through the side doors. Company investigators. Right on schedule. Ethan saw them too. For the first time all night, real panic flashed across his face. One investigator approached carefully. Mr. Parker, we need a private conversation. Ethan laughed too loudly. About what? Expense irregularities. Nearby guests suddenly became very interested in their wine glasses. Ethan looked around the room, searching for control that no longer existed. Then he saw Rachel. She had just entered beside Linda. Simple dark blue dress, hair pulled back. No fear in her face anymore. And the moment Ethan saw that calm expression, I think he finally understood. He was losing. He moved toward her immediately. Rachel, tell them this is ridiculous. Rachel didn't move. You've blown this completely out of proportion, Ethan snapped louder now. People turned openly toward them. His perfect image was slipping too fast for him to stop it. You let your father poison this marriage. Rachel looked at him quietly for several seconds, then said, I stayed silent for years. The ballroom had gone almost completely still. Her voice never rose. But I'm done protecting you. Simple sentence. Deadly sentence. Ethan actually looked at me then. Not angry anymore. Desperate. Like maybe another man might still save him from consequences. I said nothing. Security had already started drifting closer. One investigator spoke carefully. Mr. Parker, we need you to come with us. Ethan tried one last time. This is because of him, he said, pointing toward me. He never liked me. Nobody answered. Not even Vanessa. As security escorted Ethan toward the ballroom exit, he kept looking backward, like the room itself had betrayed him. But the truth was simpler than that. His lies finally ran out of places to stand. About 4 months after the banquet, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, making blueberry pancakes, while Lucy sat at the counter, explaining very seriously why dolphins were smarter than sharks. Apparently sharks just bite stuff. Dolphins, according to my granddaughter, had emotional maturity. I didn't argue. Saturday mornings had become our thing by then. Cartoons on low volume. Coffee brewing before sunrise. Lucy stealing chocolate chips when she thought Rachel and I weren't looking. Normal life. You don't realize how valuable normal feels until you spend enough time around chaos. Outside, early summer sunlight spread across the marina behind my neighborhood. A couple fishermen were already loading coolers into a skiff while somebody nearby blasted old Springsteen through garage speakers. Rachel walked into the kitchen wearing sweatpants and one of my old Navy hoodies. "Morning," she said softly. There was color in her face again. That still caught me off guard sometimes. For a long while, my daughter had looked like somebody surviving instead of living. Now she looked tired in ordinary ways. Teacher tired. Mom tired. Human tired. Not frightened. She poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter watching Lucy draw dolphins with blue crayons. "Therapy went okay this week?" I asked carefully. Rachel nodded. "Yeah." Pause. "Hard? But good. That's another thing people don't talk about enough. Leaving isn't the finish line. Sometimes it's just where the real repair work starts. The legal mess surrounding Ethan moved slower than television makes people think. Fraud investigations, financial reviews, divorce hearings, all of it took months. His company terminated him quietly after internal audits confirmed expense abuse and falsified reimbursements. Linda handled most of the legal process, while Rachel focused on rebuilding her life one small decision at a time. Honestly, revenge stopped mattering to me after a while. That surprised me. For weeks after everything exploded, I thought satisfaction would come from watching Ethan lose things: the job, the apartment, the image he worshipped so much. But that feeling fades quicker than people admit. What stayed with me instead was guilt. I kept replaying old moments in my head. Rachel canceling family visits, Lucy flinching at loud voices, bruises explained too quickly. All the signs I softened because confronting them felt uncomfortable. One evening, about a month after the banquet, I apologized to Rachel for that. We were sitting on the back porch, watching rain move across the water. I should have seen it sooner, I told her. Rachel shook her head immediately. "You did see parts of it." "Not enough." "No," she said quietly. "You saw exactly what I let you see." That hurt too because it was true. Abuse turns entire households into careful little performances. Everyone learns their role. Rachel's role had been keeping peace. Mine had been respecting boundaries. Ethan's had been controlling the room. The only person who acted honestly was Lucy. Kids always know more than adults think they do. A few weeks later, Rachel found part-time work again at an elementary school counseling office in Virginia Beach. Nothing glamorous. But the first day she came home smiling about her students, I sat in my garage afterward and cried for 10 straight minutes, where nobody could see me. Sometimes healing arrives quietly. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just somebody laughing again after years of silence. I also rebuilt Lucy's education account. Not all at once. I'm comfortable not wealthy. But between recovered settlement money and careful restructuring through Linda's help, her future no longer felt stolen. One afternoon, Lucy rode her bike crookedly down my driveway, while Rachel jogged beside her laughing. "Keep pedaling." "I am pedaling." "You're steering into the bushes." I sat on the porch, pretending to read the newspaper, while watching both of them out of the corner of my eye. Peace. Actual peace. Not silence covering pain, not people walking on eggshells. Real peace. Ethan called one final time near the end of summer. Blocked number. I answered before realizing who it was. His voice sounded smaller somehow. Not dramatic, just worn down. "Tom, can I talk to Rachel?" "Number." Long silence. Then I loved her. I looked out toward the water behind my house. "You probably did," I said. That confused him. Because people like Ethan think love excuses damage. It doesn't. "You still destroyed her," I told him. Another silence. Then I hung up. Didn't yell. Didn't threaten him. Didn't need to. A few days later, Lucy asked me something while we were sitting on the dock eating melting popsicles. "Grandpa?" "Yeah." "Were you a hero in the Navy?" I laughed softly. "No, sweetheart." She frowned. "But Mom says you saved us." The breeze moved gently across the water, while sailboats rocked against their ropes nearby. I thought about all the years I spent believing strength meant staying calm no matter what. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it isn't. Finally, I told her. Heroes are just people who show up when it matters. Lucy considered that very seriously, then nodded once like she'd been handed important information. That night, after everybody went to sleep, I sat alone on the back porch with one last cup of coffee, listening to crickets and distant boat engines drifting across the dark water. Life had become quiet again, but this time quiet felt earned. If this story stays with you, I hope it reminds you to pay attention when the people you love begin disappearing into themselves. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is ask difficult questions before it's too late. And if somebody reaches for help, even quietly show up.